All right, we are ready to get started. Tonight we're going to talk about the tongue, and this is probably what Proverbs is most famous for. All the Proverbs for and against speech, and hopefully, if we got enough time, this may be a 2-weeker. This one may be, but hopefully, if we have enough time, we'll go through. We'll start off talking about what's wrong with the tongue, and then we will talk about what's right with the tongue. For illustration, usually when you're in church, you hear all the things you shouldn't do, right? No cussing, no gossip, no slander, no idle words, and that's where we spend most of our time. But actually, the Bible says just as much about positive things with your tongue, how you should encourage one another, how you should pray, how you should lift one another up, how you should be a man or a lady of integrity, and things such as that. So we'll get started here. First of all, in the sins of the tongue, we're going to talk about the idea of corrupt speech. Now, oftentimes when we talk about corrupt speech, we talk about cursing and cussing, and that's true, but also corrupt, the idea goes back to here as far as being a rotten apple in a barrel. We don't have many barrels of apples anymore, but imagine you have a thing of brownies. If you have never mind, we cannot hurt brownies. Brownies are sacred. Say that you have some sort of fruit pie. If you got one rotten piece of fruit in that pie, it messes the whole pie up, right? That's how corrupt speech is. You and I, we can, as James would say, worship the Lord with our tongues, but then if we curse the Lord later or curse our fellow man, then that just messes everything up. And that's what we're talking about here with this corrupt speech. Chapter 6, verse 12, a worthless person, a wicked man, is someone who walks with a perverse mouth. Chapter 17, verse 20. Uh-oh. Just a second. Let me make sure my thing works.
We can all turn around.
Huh?
He said we could all turn around.
We could all turn around. Yeah, my view's a whole lot better than your view. But we'll go across here. Let's go ahead and skip the lying. We'll skip the lying. Scott said a second ago this is Lori's fault, so we're going to talk about lying for a little bit. In chapter 12, go ahead and turn there. Chapter 12, we'll look at verses 19 and 22. And that passage says, the truthful lip is established forever, but a lying tongue is only good for a moment. You go 3 verses later. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who deal truthfully are his delight. Let's talk about those 2 verses for a little bit. Oh, look, it's up there. Great. Look at that first verse. If you say a lie, it can help you for a moment. Did you clean your room? Sure, I cleaned my room. Did you do this chore, that chore? It may help you for a moment, right? But once people will get in their minds that you're not a truthful person, that's going to stay with you as far as your reputation. They're going to see that you're not a person of integrity. So lying can help you for a moment, but you need to keep your integrity. That way people will see you for an entire life. Now, looking there in verse 22, that word abomination. A lot of times we focus on that word abomination when we talk about homosexuality, right? And oftentimes we'll say it's an abomination before God, and we'll talk about that as far as how it's something which God absolutely detests. You read in Romans 1, and as you look in Romans 1, you see where men and women and that idea of homosexuality is a sign of how far, acceptance of it is a sign of how far the culture has moved away from God. You see in 1 Corinthians 6, verses 18 and 19, that those who are adulterers, those who are homosexuals have to change if they're going to be a part of what God wants them to be. They once were effeminate. They once were homosexual. They once were adulterers, but now they are justified, cleansed, and washed in the name of God. And oftentimes we'll go back to the Old Testament and talk about how it says that word abomination. But we tend to rank sins, right? You know, you got your big sins and your sins that everybody else does, and, we kind of excuse those. Notice it says the word abomination. What does God believe about lies? Most people, younger folks, especially millennials in studies, we oftentimes will point out that they consider lying to be something which is okay. It's something which is natural and which absolutely everyone does. We've been cultured to believe our politicians never tell the truth and never actually say they're going to do what, or they never actually do what they say they're going to do. Well, you see here in this verse, it does say that lying lips are an abomination towards God. You go to John chapter 8, who's the father of all liars? Satan, okay? What's that tell you God's opinion is of liars? Not very good, right? Go to Revelation chapter 21 and verse 8. You see there all the people being thrown into the lake of fire. Those who are disobedient to parents, those who are murderers, those who are thieves, and also liars. And so you go throughout Scripture and you see there's very few sins that get God more angry than the sin of lying. And it's so strange because in our culture, we're used to it. And we expect people to lie oftentimes. 14 verse 25, a true witness will deliver souls, but a deceitful witness speaks lies. 19 verse 5, a false witness will never go unpunished, but he who speaks lies will not escape. It says once again in a parallel form there in verse 9. Now, why do you think in our culture we're so used to lying? Why is it people don't see that as a sin akin to some of the others? Why do we see that as a small sin? Do you think? Everybody else does it. It's something we kind of come to expect, right? Yes. Okay. Okay, there's not the major immediate consequence. Sometimes it's something which we feel like we can justify too. You know, well, I said this lie so they would feel better. Things such as that. Okay. All right. Let's look at our next one, slander. The hypocrite with his mouth destroys his neighbor, but through knowledge the righteous man shall be delivered. A talebearer shall always reveal his secrets, but he who is faithful, and he who is of a faithful spirit, conceals a matter. Now, what is slander? Is telling somebody something, and sometimes it's true. Oftentimes, as a matter of fact, especially in the biblical use of the word, it's true. But what makes it slander is the motive behind it. When, say, somebody talks about me, or say I talk about somebody. Say I'm talking to the elders one day, and I say, hey, listen, brother so-and-so, he's struggling with this sin, whatever it may be. That's not a bad thing. In fact, that can be a good thing if I'm trying to let the shepherds of the church know a sin that somebody's struggling with. And maybe they can pray for him, and maybe they can help him, and maybe they can assist him. But if I go and tell the elders or tell somebody about that and say, hey, so-and-so is doing this, and I'm doing it to make myself look better, or if I'm anxious to make this person look bad, sort of like I'm tattling on him, that's slander. Slander is not a difference between truth and falsehood. Slander is with the motive. I'm trying to put this person down, whether it's tattling, whether it's letting other people know where he's struggling so that I can look better or so that he can look worse. Does that make sense? Is that kind of close to y'all's definition? Close? Okay. Yes, sir.
Like when you slander somebody, aren't you trying to destroy their character?
Yeah.
You're just trying to totally
You're trying to destroy their character. You're trying to tell somebody what, and it can be true sometimes, but you're saying it in a way, I think that's a good way to put it, saying it in a way to destroy their character, destroy the way in which other people look at them. Chapter 26, 24. He who hates disguises it with his lips and lays up deceit within himself. When he speaks kindly, do not believe him, for 7 abominations are in his heart. Though his hatred is covered by deceit, his wickedness will be revealed before the assembly. Whoever digs a pit will fall into it, and he who rolls a stone will have it roll back on him. You see what it says there? Here's a guy who's talking to you, and he's disguising it with his lips, acting like it's real good, acting like he's your best friend. But what he's really doing is he is laying open a pit. He is trying to find a way to trap you, or he's trying to massage you to get whatever information he can out of you. Now, when you do that to somebody, according to here at the end, verse 27, when you dig a ditch for somebody else, what ends up happening to you? Right. You ever watch the Roadrunner and the Coyote going back and forth? The coyote will spend all this time coming up with just a special trap. He'll dig a hole or he'll make a mousetrap of some sort or whatever else because he's going to catch this roadrunner, right? And invariably what happens every time? The coyote gets stuck in it, right? You know, if they would have in those cartoons way back then put above the top that said, "Do not try this at home," think how many more people would be alive today, right? You know, today you have instructions about everything in the world, right? I think I saw somebody that had coffee the other day at McDonald's or Hardee's or somewhere, and on the cup it said, "Caution, contents are hot." And I thought, well, yeah, you know, Roadrunner and Coyote, it never said at the beginning, "Don't try this at home." Or Tom and Jerry. You ever see the violence in Tom and Jerry? Man, our cartoons were fun back then. Way back then. Okay. 29 verse 5, a man who flatters his neighbor spreads a net for his feet. Once again, you see a little bit more on slander there. All right, this is one that I have trouble with right here if we're doing our public confession. And maybe it's why I'm a preacher, okay? Talking too much. I had to find myself a job where I was allowed to talk in church. And I finally found the perfect job. I'm allowed to talk in church. But it's not just in church where I get in trouble. I'm one of these guys that I'm a jabber, however you'd say that. 13 verse 3, he who guards his mouth shall preserve his life, but he who opens wide his lips, that man shall have destruction. 14 verse 3, in the mouth of a fool is a rod of pride, but the lips of the wise shall preserve him. 15:28, the heart of the righteous studies how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours forth evil. 17:27, he who has knowledge spares his words, and a man of understanding is of a calm spirit. 18 verse 13, he who answers a matter before he hears it, it is a folly and a shame to him. What did Abraham Lincoln say? You remember one of his proverbs? It's best to keep your mouth shut and let everybody think that you're a fool than to open it up and confirm it, right? You heard that one? How is it that James put it? Let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, all right? Why do we have so much trouble talking too much? What do you think it is?
We have an inflated self-image for one thing.
Okay, an ego. Inflated self-image, absolutely. That's a problem, yeah. Yes, sir.
For me, it keeps me from listening.
Okay, it keeps you from listening. You know, when you get an argument with a spouse or an argument sometimes with a teenager, you ever notice how you're already forming an answer even while they're still talking? And as a matter of fact, they could just talk nonsense and you would never know because you're already thinking about what you're going to say back. Okay? Now, that may not happen in your house, but it seems to happen in my house a lot. Well, it's because we already know what we want to say, and we're not open to being taught or to listening very well. And that happens a lot of times in arguments, and especially it'll happen in religious arguments. In religious arguments, man, that'll crank up. We'll have some guys who'll knock on the door. I had some knock on the door about a month and a half ago. And they showed up with their little New World Translation. And so they wanted to talk, and so I was like, hey, that's what I do for a living, kind of this up here. So we sat down and we talked. Now, invariably, they show up at your door and they want to talk about the idea of the destruction and 144,000 people going to heaven and that being the only people there and a renewed earth and all these things. Generally, when they knock on our door, what we want to talk back about is what you have to do to be saved. You repent, you're baptized for the remission of your sins. And so we are pushing our point, they're pushing their point, and we usually talk over each other, and then we walk away thinking that we won whatever argument that we were in. And usually when somebody comes and knocks on our door and has a religious discussion, that's what happens. A lot of times when you're at work or you're at school and you have a religious discussion, a lot of times we have our talking points, and they say theirs, we say ours, and we never really get very far because we don't listen to one another. And so there has to be wisdom in being able to understand what other people are saying. wisdom and understanding what's going on there. We've got to be careful about doing that. 1528 that we just read right there in the middle. You study things to know just how to say the right thing. You don't win an argument by quantity, you win an argument by quality. And so you're trying to win a soul and not win the fight necessarily. All right, some more of this, talking too much. You'll notice we have a lot of slides because as I was making this yesterday or the day before, I was just thinking, man, I got to preach this to myself for a while. So you're going to get a lot of talking too much slides. 20 verse 19, he goes about as a talebearer shall reveal secrets. Therefore, be very careful. Do not associate with the one who flatters with his lips. If a person is always your greatest fan, be very, very careful. That's especially true of politicians, but it's also true of all of us. 21:23, whoever guards his mouth and tongue, that man keeps his soul from trouble. 23 verse 9, do not speak in the hearing of a fool, for he will despise the wisdom of your words. 24:2, for their heart devises violence, their lips talk of troublemaking. And 25:9, debate your case with your neighbor, and do not disclose the secret to another. Two I really want to focus on there. 23:9, you got to be careful sometimes with who you talk to, right? How did Jesus describe this? He talked about throwing pearls. What did he say? Don't cast the pearls before the swine. Now, I know for the first couple times I read that, I thought, what an offensive thing to say to somebody. You know, what in the world? That's just offensive to call somebody a pig, especially back then, unclean animal. What's Jesus saying there? He's saying you have two precious resources. One resource is your words and your influence. The other resource is your time, right? Those are your pearls. Don't spend all of your resources, your wisdom and your time, your influence and your time with something that's not going to get you anywhere. Don't spend it teaching somebody who doesn't want to learn. Instead, spend it finding somebody who does want to learn. Use that time, use that influence to find a situation where you can do some good. That's something pretty important, I think. And that's true not only in just religious discussions, but really in our life. You've got to be careful who you spend your time with because you can lose your time and your influence. Now, 25, verse 9 is good. Jesus said something akin to it in chapter 18 of Matthew, right? If you have problems with a brother, right? Jesus said, if you've got a problem with your brother, go and put it in the bulletin, right? And tell every single person in the foyer what that person did. And then put it on Facebook, because that's what everybody needs to see on Facebook, right? Too many cat videos, we need more problems. Okay? That's not what Jesus said, was it? What did Jesus say? If you've got a problem, go to your brother personally and work on it. Work on it with that person in a personal way. And if you can fix it, and even if you can't fix it, according to verse 9, what's he say? Do not disclose it to everyone else. A lot of times, two people will have a problem, and these two people will get angry at each other, and then they'll go tell everybody what the other person has said, and then they actually end up realizing there was a misunderstanding, and these two people become best friends, but now guess what's wrong with everybody else? Since they've been brought to the argument, they want to fight. And so you cannot find peace in that situation. Rough stuff, rough stuff. All right, our last slide on this one. 26 verse 20. Where there is no wood, the fire goes out. Where there's no talebearer, the strife ceases. The words of a talebearer are like tasty trifles, and they go down into the inmost body. All right, a little bit of difference between those two. If there's no wood, what happens? The fire goes out. Okay? If there's not anybody who talks, then the strife will cease. One of the beautiful things about an argument is if you don't participate, it's hard for that argument to continue. Now, sometimes it's important for you to participate, at least in a healthy way, so that you can find a positive resolution. But when you see that there's not going to be a positive resolution, one of the ways to take care of an argument is just don't participate. Show love, show kindness, but don't get out on the floor with the other person so they can box your ears. And I think that's something pretty important for us to remember. Not every fight is worth winning, and not every fight is worth participating in. And so there's sometimes when it's good not to be in that fight. Nehemiah up on the wall. Sinbad and all the others called for him to come down, and he said, I cannot come down because why? The work I am doing is too great and too important, right? Okay. Now, looking at verse 22, these tasty trifles. Sometimes you hear gossip, and man, it just feels good, right? I mean, it feels good to hear what's going on with these folks. And it's a lot of fun looking at what some people are doing in life and hearing about these things. But you hear them, and it's something which, when it goes down, doesn't make you feel very good at all. Nowadays, one of the things that just turns my stomach is yogurt-covered raisins. Now, yogurt-covered raisins, you know those little white yogurt-covered raisins? Now, they taste good, but I think I was in 3rd grade or 4th grade. My mom had bought a bag, and it was one of these big bags, and she left me in the car while she was shopping, and I ate that whole bag, made myself sick. And every time I see that now, I'm just like, oh, those raisins, no, you know. That's the way it is with us. A lot of times when we hear gossip and when we hear things about other people, it feels really good, but then it's something that's not healthy for us. Because we hear something about somebody, and maybe it was just a fleeting thing, or maybe if it wasn't right, or maybe if it was right, they repented of it later. But when I see that person, see him, a month later or a year later, what do I think about? What that person was doing wrong way back then. Yeah. And that's something we have to struggle with, I think, is learning how to forgive people, learning how to realize people change just like we change, that people will need grace just like we need grace. All right, 29 verse 11, a fool vents all of his feelings, but a wise man knows how to hold them back. All right, you ever just want to get in an argument and a fight and just really, really, really win? That works well until you find somebody bigger, stronger, and smarter than you are, right? And I had a boy in my little Boy Scout troop. He got in a fight because somebody had said something about his mama. Welcome to middle school, huh? And he got in a fight, and he lost. And I was talking to him afterwards, and I said, well, what did you do wrong? And I expected him to say, well, I should have just, blown it off, or I should not have paid attention. He said, I got in a fight with somebody that was 200 pounds. And I said, well, yeah, that's an issue because, this fellow's only about that big, little guy. Watch it before you vent your feelings. Sometimes it would have been a lot better for him just to swallow his pride and not pay attention and let that bully go on to the next person. We get in trouble. When you vent and you say everything you think, you can get in major trouble with that, can't he? All right, verse 20, once again, of 29. You see a man who is hasty in his words, there is more hope for a fool than for him. If you're somebody who always talks and you're the first person to speak up, you're going to get in trouble, aren't you? What apostle does this make you think of? Peter, all right? Now, what's interesting about Peter is 9 out of 10 times Peter was right? Jesus is walking on the water. Peter says, hey, let me walk out there. Was that right? Was that good? Hey, you had a man with faith, right? Only one man sunk in the water because only one man went out there. He spoke before he had his faith in the right spot. Matthew 17, Peter stands up and he says, wow, Jesus, you're in the Mount Transfiguration. I think you're equal with Elijah and Moses. Now, that's what everybody else was thinking, but Peter's the one who said it. And that's when you see in 17 verse 7 where God comes over and says, this is my beloved son, you listen to him. Peter had this issue early in his life. He thought something and he said it. Now, it's interesting going over to 1 Peter and seeing where in 1 Peter, Peter spends most of his time talking about humility and talking about self-control. You think there's some things he learned over the course of his life? Absolutely, absolutely. All right, the next sin that we have that comes with the tongue is anger. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word will stir up anger. Okay, once again, in an argument, when somebody comes across pretty hateful, a lot of times if you're nice to them and show love, it's hard for them to keep it up. Not always, but usually it's hard for them to keep it up. But if you are a mirror and you reflect only what people give to you, you're going to spend a lot of time fighting. And so a soft answer will turn away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up that anger. 18 verse 6, a fool's lips enter into contention, and his mouth calls for blows. All right? That's kind of scary, isn't it? This guy walking around, he's got a face that's just begging to be punched. All right? Kind of a funny thought right there, isn't it? You know, some people have a face for radio. They say that about ugly people on the radio. This guy has a face begging to be punched because he's always speaking. A fool's mouth is his destruction, and his lips are the snare of his soul. The majority of sins which men engage in happen with their mouths. 26:21, as charcoal is to burning coals and wood to fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. Boy, you see this sometimes. For example, you see it with preachers sometimes. You'll see a preacher who is at this church, and boy, this church is just boiling over. And finally, it comes to the point where he's no longer going to be preaching there. And he goes and finds this church, and this church just starts boiling over, because it's a contentious preacher. He's somebody who preaches truth, but he preaches pretty harshly. Sometimes you'll see that in relationships and within a church. You'll see a person, and wherever they are, you can tell exactly where it is, because that's where the noise or that's where the smoke is coming from. And these people sometimes can hurt the value and hurt the peace and tranquility of a congregation because they're always looking for a fight. You ever see somebody like that? They enter into a room, and they could be in a room with all of heaven's angels. And after about 3 minutes, they see the 3 people who are their friends and the 2 people that they need to be enemies with, because there always has to be contention in their heart. We've got to be sure that, first of all, we're not that person, and second of all, that we're not always associated with that person. That contentiousness and that anger can get us in a lot of trouble, get us in a lot of issues as we go through. You know, we won't have time to finish it, but let's look at some of the positive things. I don't want to just spend our class time talking about what not to do with the tongue. Let's talk about some good things. The mouth of the righteous, we see here in 10 verse 11, is a well of life, but violence covers the mouth of the wicked. The mouth of the righteous is choice silver, and the heart of the wicked is worth little. The lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for lack of wisdom. The mouth of the righteous brings forth wisdom, but the perverse tongue shall be cut out. You see what he's doing there. You'll notice this is happening about every 8 verses as you go through. Every 10 verses, you see where he's working in his circle, as we've talked about happening in Hebrew poetry. What's he saying each time? A person who says the right thing, that person is a well of life. That person is a bar of silver. That person is someone who brings forth wisdom. Hopefully you had good parents when you grew up. And hopefully, even if your mama's gone, or even if your father has gone on to eternity, you remember the soft words and the encouraging words you heard. And you can look back on those words which are said, and they still encourage you even today after they're gone. And hopefully you have a lot of friends who, when you think of those friends, you think of them as someone who's encouraging towards you, someone who is helpful towards you. That's the kind of person that every one of us needs to strive to be, especially in the Lord's church. We need to be somebody who lifts other people up. The world is a harsh place, a mean place. You go outside of this building, in our culture, we do nothing but break each other down, right? Republicans find everything in the world wrong with Democrats. Democrats find everything in the world wrong with Republicans. People at work, the management's always finding things wrong with people who are working. People who are working are always finding things wrong with the management. And it's amazing how in just about every way that we mix in life, in our life today, people are tearing each other down. If we can make church a place where people are lifted up and encouraged, the church is going to grow fast, because that's what people need. People need a cheerleader. People need somebody who cares for them, who knows their name, and who lifts them up. And so look at the things you say. As we said before, don't say everything that comes to mind, right? But look for ways in which you lift other people up with the words that you say. 12:25, anxiety in the heart of a man shall cause depression, but saying a good word makes it glad. Be somebody who takes out anxiety. Be somebody who puts good words in people's minds. Help them out. 15:26, the thoughts of the wicked, they are an abomination to the Lord, but the words of the pure person is pleasant. Pretty interesting, isn't it, looking through those words right there. I didn't know how to label this next section, so I said educated words, mainly because I ran out of room. But what I meant by it when we came across educated words is somebody who knows what they're talking about. You ever see somebody who has no idea what they're talking about? Several years ago, when I first started youth ministry, one of the jobs of the youth minister was to coach the basketball team of the fourth graders. I didn't know anything about basketball. So I was just like, okay, guys, just bounce the ball and go down there, you know? And so I went to the library, ordered some VHS tapes of Bobby Knight coaching. I don't know if that helped me. I never did throw a chair. But it was interesting kind of trying to figure some of that out. And so you get in trouble when you don't know what you're talking about and you pretend like you do know what you're talking about. Chapter 10, verse 13, wisdom is found in the lips of him who has understanding, but a rod is for the back of those who are devoid of understanding. In other words, be a person of understanding, a person who knows about life. Wise people store up knowledge. The mouth of the foolish is near destruction. The lips of the righteous know what is acceptable, but the mouth of the wicked knows what is perverse. 15 verse 2, the tongue of the wise uses knowledge rightly, but the mouth of fools pours forth foolishness. The lips of the wise disperse knowledge, but the heart of the fool does not do so. A word fitly spoken, you probably remember this book if you're around in the early 80s. Maybe you remember this book. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold and settings of silver. Anybody remember that book? Okay, well, anyway. Yeah, you're not that old. Okay, I'm sorry. By long forbearance, a ruler is persuaded, and a gentle tongue shall break a bone. Okay, thank you for being here. Enjoyed our time together. We'll finish up the tongue hopefully next week, Lord willing.